Before we get started, I just want to let you know that in today's episode, we'll be covering some sensitive topics, including childhood trauma, mental health struggles, and references to suicidal thoughts and sexual vulnerability. These conversations are honest and really important, but I want to acknowledge that they may be triggering or difficult for some listeners. Please take care while listening and do what feels right for you. Why are neurodivergent girls being overlooked, misdiagnosed, and misunderstood? And how can we change that story? I'm delighted today to be chatting with best-selling author, mental health and disability advocate Leanne Maskell. Leanne is an ADHD coach and the founder and director of the coach training company ADHD Works. She was diagnosed with ADHD at 25 and autism at 31. Experiences that have shaped her mission and the incredible work she does today. Since her diagnosis, Leanne has dedicated her career to helping individuals and organisations harness the strengths of ADHD in the workplace, working with high-profile institutions like Disney and Microsoft to create more supportive environments for neurodivergent employees. She has also served as a mental health and disability legal policy advisor for the Law Society and delivered talks to the World Health Organization on improving global access to ADHD diagnosis and support. With a legal background in mental health and disability law, a former career as a fashion model for brands like Vogue, and personal experience as a recovering workaholic, Leanne brings a rich, relatable perspective to everything she does. She's the best-selling author of 5 books, including ADHD and A to Z, The Model Manifesto, and All DHD Blooming Differently. Her mission is simple but powerful, to turn pain into purpose and help others feel less alone. Today we explore how boys and girls experience and navigate neurodivergence differently, why it's essential to create space for children to ask why, challenging the unspoken rules and expectations of neurotypical society, how to best support kids through the often turbulent transition from primary to secondary school, and how to help girls discover their own agency and take ownership of their lives. It's a real pleasure to welcome Leanne to the podcast. Leanne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to have you here. And I wanted to just start by reading your prologue, actually, from your book, All DHD Blooming Differently. And it says, I met my younger self for hot chocolate. She asked if she's still weird. I said yes, but it's the best thing about you. She asked if she's broken. I said no, the environment around you is. She asked why she feels so different to everybody else. I said it's because you think differently, but this isn't a bad thing. She asked if anyone will ever like her. I said yes, more than you can imagine. You just need to find them. She asked why she's told off for sliding down banisters and hanging upside down from trees. I said that she shouldn't be told off for these things, but she should be careful not to hurt herself. She asked if she really is an attention-seeking drama queen. I said no, you feel things deeply, and that's a beautiful thing to share with the world. She asked how she could just be normal. I said that's the last thing you'd ever want to be, trust me. I promised her that one day it would all make sense. Until then, she just needs to remember that she's not the problem. This is the conversation I wish someone had had with me at that age. I wrote this ADHD book for children like her to grow up feeling less broken. I hope you enjoy it. I absolutely loved reading that to start your book and just how much it resonated, sliding down banisters and hanging upside down from trees and being told off for it. What was your childhood like?
Kind of as you described there.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear you read that out. You're really good at reading it. You should have read my whole book. But then to hear it from someone else's point of view and in their voice. But I think my childhood was really difficult, I would say, because I just felt like everything about myself was wrong, and that really mirrors a lot of children that are neurodivergent experiences where you're kind of told off for being yourself, and the things that you think are normal, like sliding down banisters are like naughty and you say the wrong thing and people tell you off and you can't understand why, and you're just trying to be normal and fit in and nobody seems to like you. And I think it was really, really challenging for me as a child, and especially like in school, and you're just trying to figure out, it does feel like being like an alien where you're trying to figure out what is wrong with you, but everyone else around you is kind of like, you're fine, like stop being so weird and just be normal, but you don't really know what normal is.
Can you remember the sensation you felt, like the desire to need to hang off the trees and slide down banisters? Can you still relate to that feeling?
Yeah, I still do. Now I go to like trapeze classes and like, you know, slide down poles and pole dancing classes or whatever it is, or like as an adult now I can do that kind of stuff and not feel bad about it. But I think as a kid it was just like normal, natural thing that if there was a wall, like a door frame, I would just be climbing up it, climbing onto whatever I could and jumping off it, and I was always hurting myself. And I think I was always told off for jumping around and like told to sit down and be quiet and stop being a drama queen and attention seeking. And I think at the time I didn't really realise why any of that was attention seeking. And actually the older I've got, the more I realise that maybe there are people around me that, you know, for them that was attention seeking or a problem, but for me as a kid, like, it was just being me. And I think that's actually a really normal thing. I think that I was the normal child. I think it's less normal to expect children to be able to just sit down for 8 hours a day rather than actually do the things and like explore the world around them.
Yeah. It's interesting when you put it like that, because at what point do we mould the children? Because what I think we're learning is that with the neurodivergent brain, you can't. Mm-hmm. The neurotypical brain, you are kind of, I mean, I see that within the siblings, you know, and actually that's been one of the biggest lessons of remembering to give children choice. Because I think for me growing up, choice wasn't really something that was offered, in that, not in like a, you know, it was just more of the traditional way we were kind of told. But when you have a child that's going to fight that hierarchy, mm-hmm. they're the ones that make you stop and think as a parent. Did you have anybody kind of within your childhood that you felt understood you?
No.
No.
No, not. I had my grandma, but yeah, I had a difficult also relationship with like extended family and things. Like my dad also lived abroad, so it was really difficult for me to understand like the notion of time, and especially now looking at it through this lens of object permanence, whereas like if someone's not there physically with you, they don't exist. Like, how do you know if they're ever coming back? Like, and so that was really tricky. And I think that for me, learning that children with ADHD by the age of 12 are said to receive 20,000 more negative messages than their peers really hit home for me. And I think most people that I know and have worked with that are neurodivergent, because when you grow up feeling that your natural way of being is wrong, you start internalizing it. And so when I was writing that book, I was really interested with like why we domesticise, is that a word? But basically we can ride horses but not zebras, and it's because zebras have grown up around predators and in a situation where they needed to be less hierarchical and preserve their life and fight back, and so that's why we can't literally break them in like we do with horses and ride on them. And you can do it if you force it and torture it to be in that position, but then it was really interesting to learn about horses and how they will self-harm when they're trapped in cages as well, because it kind of reminded me of being a human being. Like, if you trap a child and force it to sit still, it will end up internalizing that and going inwards, and then that's where we see all these mental health challenges and much higher risks of suicide. And I think it's really, really challenging to go through, especially as parents, because you're not necessarily aware of what is going on because the child can't really put it into words. They don't know what they're experiencing isn't normal.
Yeah. I put out a question on my social media about neurodivergence in girls and teenagers. because I don't have teenagers. So I wanted to kind of get an understanding of what's going on for those parents, which is fascinating because suddenly you're hearing about all these different things that actually make loads of sense. So one of the biggest questions that comes up quite a bit is about the difference between, generally, obviously we're talking, every child is unique, but generally between boys masking and girls masking, and how we hear the phrase girls mask more. What's your take on that?
So I think that is definitely right, and it ties back to women in general and how much we're made to mask, like literally wearing makeup to look presentable, and then in society how we're all conditioned to be quiet and good and emotional.
So yeah.
I went to this really amazing event on the weekend. It was about anger, and they were getting all these women, it was for women, to like scream and shout and punch things, and it was amazing. At first I was
what did you go for first?
I was like, oh, I've never been like an angry, I'm like, oh, punch, yeah. But then by the end of it, everyone was like screaming, and you're like, wow, this is such power. And everyone was kind of like empowering each other. It was no kind of like judgment, and you just realize how different that is from boys who are like, you know, very cut off from their own feelings and more encouraged to be, especially connecting with each other around interests and activities. So I think a big difference for neurodivergent children is that we might prefer to bond over activities or in structured environments. So, for example, for me, I hated break time very much. Hated like any situation where there was, you know, just a big group of people and I was meant to know what to talk about and how to talk to someone about anything. And I would often hide in the bathroom. I still do, actually, as an adult. And then I would be like, oh, but now I've been in here too long. Now they're going to know, like, so it's kind of horrible. You want to disappear. But for boys, as they get older and go to secondary school, they're more encouraged to connect over things like football or sports or gaming. Whereas girls suddenly are expected to have like a best friend and be popular and all these like hierarchies that our society has created, and to look a certain way and to be fashionable, whereas boys, they don't have that pressure. And then I think you add in neurodivergence to that mix. For me personally, I would study people like more than I did my subjects at school. I would study like the popular girl and find out what she did, you know, with her hair, like when she washed it and when other people put on makeup and what they put on and what they said to each other, to be like, okay, if I do these steps, like maybe that will make me less hated. It's hard because you do feel like you're acting all the time, and I think that would be a big difference. Of masking is like you do feel like you're being perceived by other people, so it's not just like you can turn up somewhere and be natural and hang out with friends. Like for me, that is still a really difficult thing to even just meet up with a friend for a coffee. I will immediately go into like, hi, how has your life been? What have you been up to? Blah, blah, blah. Like a script without even realising it. And I think for teenagers, it becomes really hard because you've also got the impact of, obviously, generally teenagers are like figuring out who they are, their identity, etc. But then I think that a lot of neurodivergent teenagers are suffering of their mental health. Also, the impact of hormones and puberty is really rough for them. And then they're really vulnerable because, like, for me, I was really, really incredibly vulnerable and would go out clubbing all the time and just, like, binge drink alcohol because I figured out that was a way to be popular and people seemed to like me and my brain would turn off when I was drunk. But that was really, really dangerous for me. And there's a horrible statistic which says 9 out of 10 autistic women have been victims of sexual violence. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about, especially that's kind of why I wanted to write that book, and it's really not a fun read. But the things that I went through, I know that a lot of other young people go through, and it's really, really important to help them understand that people that are nice to you don't necessarily have your best interests at heart, and to understand your own vulnerabilities in that way and the differences that you communicate versus how other people communicate.
With your coaching hat on, if you were talking to the parent of a child that is going through some of the things, or a teenager that's going through the things you've just described, what would you say to them?
I think try to open a conversation. like, I remember being a teenager and just realising, oh, there is nothing that my parents can do to me. Like, what can they do? They can kick me out and then I can go live, whatever, with my boyfriend that's 5 years older than me, or like whatever. Like, I was like, oh, there's nothing they can do. And so I was a bit uncontrollable, and to the point that my mum once called the police on me. But I think that but what she didn't do, what she could have done, is like talk to your child and be like, you know, tell them that you love them, that you care about them, communicate with them in the ways that work for them, like drop them an email or a text, or, you know, leave them a video and just say, I just want to understand what is going on for you. I think children are really worried about upsetting their parents, and I think parents, the really difficult thing is not giving advice. And, you know, I've had a few conversations this week that really remind, like one conversation with a parent whose daughter really hates showering, and the parent cannot understand. She was like, but you just have to shower. And she was like, she doesn't brush her teeth. And I was like, I have not brushed my teeth today or showered. And then everyone else in the room, like the kind of coaching training room, was like, yeah, me too. Like, they all got it. And she was like, oh my God, I've been beating myself up thinking like I'm a terrible parent. And I do understand it, because I think if that's completely normal to you, the thought that someone just wouldn't do that is really, really difficult. So it's from that scale to then, like, in the evening that day, then I coached and trained another parent whose daughter was becoming like violent every evening and having like meltdowns. And that's a really difficult situation. So I think it's like looking at what other support is available, because like you don't have to do it all by yourself. And then what can you do to look after yourself is the number one priority, because although parents are very amazing, like, especially if you have neurodivergent children, I think huge respect to you from me, but really hard job. But like looking after yourself is the number one priority, and your own well-being. I know that it's really tempting to pour everything into your children, but you can actually model for them what regulation looks like. So this conversation that we had ended up with them deciding when their child next gets upset to just go, for the parent to go to the punching bag in the house and just start punching it. And I was like, and that will give your child the option to either come with you and also punch the punching bag, or do something else.
It's a great idea. Or you could even use the cushions, or
exactly.
anything.
Well, I didn't know we could.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Anything,
but like, that's the kind of thing you wouldn't necessarily think to do unless someone had helped spark that. Because, you know, for that parent, they were trying to calm them down and help them. But it's almost like looking after you, that models the same to them. And it's funny, because I was kind of saying to most parents, is like, just try to be a tiny bit worse of a parent. Like, try not to care so, like, it's so difficult, but I work with a lot of parents whose kids are, especially around university age, they're not leaving home, they maybe are at uni or at the point where they might be getting a job, but they're not doing anything, they're not leaving the house, they're struggling, and their parents are just, like, they don't know what to do, and they're really scared of their mental health and them becoming suicidal because they know about the suicide risk, etc. Often in these situations, when I coach the parents, it's like, how are they surviving financially? And they're paying for them to survive. So it's like, well, if you take away their money, they will have to get a job and survive. So it's kind of like making the environment a little bit less accommodating, and that actually gives these kids the motivation and also the realization that they don't have to like become a lawyer, and they don't have to live life in one way, but they can live it in whatever way they want. And, you know, if they want to go to Korea on their bucket list, like, to make money and go to that country. But I think that we're all living in a really difficult world with social media, where it really presents so much pressure for kids. So it's not surprising that so many of them are just giving up and not trying. But also, as a parent, like, it's really important to remember that it's not your fault. Like, you're really, if you care, if you're listening to this and you care enough to listen to this, you're doing a good job. Like, a lot of people don't.
Thanks, Leanne. That's such an important message and a huge comfort to listen to, and something we could all do with hearing or being told every day, because it is a place where you feel you're failing a lot. You're questioning yourself a lot. You know, you're trying to learn and understand a brain which you know, as you were saying, to you doesn't necessarily make sense. Just going back to hygiene, and because that's something that came up in the questions about the sensory issues around showering, washing hair. And also another one that came up quite a lot in the questions was about periods and the sensory issues around that. Can you explain, you know, from a personal point of view, but then also the practical point of how to help navigate through those?
Yeah, I actually have a whole chapter on this in the book because it's stuff. So to give you an example of me, I think I was maybe about 10 years old when there was a conversation about shower gel or something. And I said, oh, I don't use soap. And I said, I don't use soap. And then everyone looked at me and they were like, what do you use? And I was like, nothing, like water. I didn't realise that you were supposed to use like shower gel or soap in the shower to clean. And then my mum was like, but there's soap in the shower. Like, why don't you use it? And I was like, because it's gross. I was like, it's like slimy and gross. And they were all like, what? And it's that realisation that you don't realise that someone is maybe functioning differently to how you think they are until you talk to them. So it is having these conversations. And I remember with like periods, my mum just gave me a book. And I remember sitting with my friend and like trying to figure it out ourselves, like, what is a tampon? How do these things work? And God, now I would be even worse because at that point you can have limited access to the internet. But these days you can Google anything, and so they can learn from the internet, but also the internet is really dangerous, like incredible. For me and my limited access to the internet of my age, that's when I stumbled across these like eating disorder websites that literally give you instructions on how to, like, you know, make yourself sick. And so I dread to think
it's scary
what is out there now. So that's why I think the most important thing you can do as a parent is kind of overcome your own discomfort of talking about these things, because probably your parents didn't talk about it with you. And the same thing is like body image. Like, I talked to one parent and I said, you know, your daughter's got really bad body dysmorphia. And she was like, really? I was like, yes. Like, how do you not, like, you know, the daughter wouldn't even wear t-shirts, like, or go outside in summer. But she didn't realise that. And I said, well, how do you feel about your body? And she was like, oh my God. She was like, I was consciously not talking about my body around her because I hate how my body looks. So it all comes from like the parents, and it's ironic because it's the exact opposite of what you get told. But like, actually the more you can work through your own stuff, the better it is for your child. And so, you know, talking about things like sex, periods, showering, I was talking with with the woman that was talking about showering. I said, why is it important to shower? And she was like, because she was like, she needs to shower twice a day. And I was like, why? And she was like, to be clean. And she was like, you know, to be clean. And I said, why? Like, because she has to shower again at the end of the day, doesn't she? It's like, I would argue that there is like a bit of a case for this. And so it's like actually thinking about what are the reasons for doing these kinds of things, taking away the shame around it, and like helping your child to figure out a way that works for them that doesn't feel like awkward. I think something I've heard a lot. Well, as a teenager, I was broken into by like burglars, and the police came around and they saw my bedroom and they were like shocked. They were like, they trashed this little girl's bedroom. It was in Cyprus, and then I was like, oh, actually, that's actually how it was already. And they were like, oh my God. And it was like a flaw. It was disgusting. And I think the parents really feel a lot of shame as well, because they're like, it's just really like they can't comprehend it. When one of my first ever clients, like her mum was like, no, you don't understand, my daughter is like really bad, like really, really bad. And now imagine it's like kind of period stuff and like all of this kind of hormone. And I told her about my one, and she was like, yes, that's exactly what she's like. And I was like, yes, yes, I get it. But it is that sensory differences there. And like, I didn't even realise that was a problem. I could live quite happily in my kind of floor robe. And like, I was not really aware of my surroundings. And so I think as much as you can, trying to chat to your children and open up these lines of communication. Like when I coached that person's child, actually, we ended up, they were interested in fashion. And then making like a fun routine for them to like clean their room for 5 minutes before they went to bed to a particular song. And mainly the reason for that was because they liked their clothes. So they wanted them hung up. Mm-hmm. So it's like trying to think of things yourself from a different viewpoint of like, okay, why do we brush our teeth? Or like, instead of, I think what you were saying earlier, like the traditional mode, I would imagine, especially with children, is like, because I said so. Like, there isn't a reason. With my dad, he was trying to make us go and drive to see family at Christmas, and I was really young, and I said, why do we have to do that? And I was like, we don't talk to them the rest of the year. And he was like, because they're family. And I was like, but why? We don't talk to them. And he was like, because we share blood. And I was like, so what? And it's those kind of uncomfortable questions that sometimes we maybe don't ask ourselves as parents. And I imagine having a child as a neurodivergent must be really annoying, because you probably get asked questions like that all the time, and you're like, I don't know, actually.
But it's also really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because actually what they have to say, I find I have some of the most interesting conversations when it's just the two of us. I find the topics fascinating, and I'm often just like, wow, why are you thinking? The other day we were talking about what was bigger, Hyde Park or Kew Gardens. And I remember just being like, that's just such a... What a thing to kind of think and want to talk about. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Leanne, but did you write in your book about being told to wait to open your presents?
Yeah. That's probably one of my earliest memories, is being told off for ruining Christmas, because I think all the way through December we're like, can we open the presents? And my parents were like, no, you have to wait until Christmas morning, Christmas Day. So I woke up early, woke up my brother, and I was like, let's go. We can open all our presents, open them all. And then my family came downstairs, and I was like, thank you for my, a T-shirt. My granddad and all of my extended relatives were there. And my mum was like, what have you done? And I was like, but you said we had to wait until Christmas morning. And it is Christmas morning. And I got very badly told off for that. But I couldn't understand why. And again, it goes to that point of like giving presents, like, if I was like, they're for me, and I've said thank you, so what is the problem here? Yeah. And that's about the whole point of like, no, we all need to like watch you open the presents. And I was like, I don't want to be watched opening the presents. That's exactly why I've probably opened them early. And I still, to this day, I really hate receiving presents like that. There's so much anxiety of like, it feels like it's for them rather than me, and I have to be like, oh, thank you, I really want this thing. That like, yeah, thanks. And so it's like a real challenge there. And then again, it is like those social norms, and I guess being really clear and explicit about what the rules are and why they're in place, and like then giving the child the option of choice or illusion of choice, being like, what time would you like to wake up for us all to open the present? What would you like to do before we make it all special and we all open them at the same time? Or could have helped.
I think when I read that, I felt, although there was that element of, tongue-in-cheek, we're kind of smiling about it, but actually it's really sad. Because in that,
I'm kind of like, oh my
no, really sad in that, there's this young girl who has done exactly what she thought she was asked to do, and then told off for it. And I think, when I now am desperately trying to understand everything I possibly can, I'd be like, well done, you waited till the morning. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you from my youngest.
Yeah, because that wasn't an act of, but also that's just one example.
Yeah.
And how many times that must have happened to you because you just weren't seen properly, you weren't understood.
Yeah.
And I just, and when that happens from a young age, and then, as we read through your book and other people that are writing their stories now who have been diagnosed later, the stories of the mental health challenges are all similar.
Yeah.
And where it leads to. So all we can hope really is that these conversations are raising that awareness to stop these awful statistics.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to acceptance. Like, if your child doesn't want to shower twice a day, just let them not shower twice. If they want to go out with a stained T-shirt on, let them do it. They'll learn by themselves if they want to not put a stained T-shirt on. And they'll naturally develop, work with a lot of parents that are like, well, if I don't unpack their suitcase, they'll just live out a suitcase. I'm like, what is the problem with that? And it's hard because, like, but they won't be clean, and they love them so much, which is so amazing to see. But also if you do just let them, you know, fail a little bit in your eyes or whatever it is, but still accept them, I think that is a really good lesson to give people of like, even if you know, don't have a job or you don't shower, you don't brush your teeth, you'll still be loved. No matter, like, love is not conditional on waiting until a certain time in the morning to open your presents, or but it's just really difficult, I think, as parents, because obviously you're living in a neurotypical society that says no, children should be at school doing X, Y, and Z, and even from birth they are held to these standards, and obviously you want your children to be healthy, so if they are not meeting these standards, you're scared. And then that can become frustration over time as they get older and older, but like you said, in their mind they're just doing what they were asked to do. And so it's just trying to almost beat that thought and remember, like, children don't want to get in trouble. Like, they're not doing things on purpose. They don't have any ill intent, like, to get in trouble. If they are acting out in a certain way, it's for a reason. So, yeah, from my mind as a coach, I'm always trying to understand the why.
Yeah.
Instead of especially telling people off. It's like, what is the point of telling them off? Like, if you were crying and I told you to stop crying, it wouldn't make you stop crying. It's just when we feel understood by people. And I think if you are bringing up a child and can help them to feel accepted and loved, no matter what label they might have or they might not have, I think that is the antidote to this kind of statistics around suicide and mental health problems. Because it, like that question you asked me when you said, did you have anyone you felt like you could talk to, and I said no. I think for kids to have just one person that they can talk to and be like, why do we have, what is bigger, Hyde Park or Kew Gardens, is like amazing, because you have an outlet for you. And that's why coaching can be really, really effective as well, to like have someone that you can ask these questions to of like, what is a friendship? Like, why do people like have to wait until 9 o'clock to open their presents? It can be really nice to just have someone that sees you for who you are and accepts you, and because that means other people in the world will as well. So as the parents is just trying to do that, and then I guess also doing it with yourself and being like, you're a good enough parent, you're doing a good job. Like,
Leanne, going back to we were talking earlier about hormones. A few of the questions that came through were the blurring between what are hormones and what is the kind of neurodivergent brain, and how does that puzzle work? Is it more intense? How do you know whether it's hormones or the brain?
First of many of these kinds of conversations of like, is it trauma or the brain? Or like, what is the ADHD? What is the whatever else it is?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is that they're all just the person. But hormones can have a huge impact. And obviously, again, it depends on the person themselves. But if we take puberty, for example, I think that kids that are neurodivergent, it affects the symptoms of their own neurodivergence quite dramatically, and also the symptoms. So, for example, we know that neurodivergent girls are far more likely to experience PMDD. I'm going to try and remember the name, and also postnatal depression as well, which is a really big thing to note, because I think after birth is a really, really dangerous time for a lot of women, and especially if you don't know why, the reasons behind that. I think it was something like suicide is the biggest killer of women in the first year after having given birth. So being aware of these, because I think when you are pregnant, your estrogen rises, if I'm correct, and then afterwards it drops. So it's like your symptoms of ADHD, for example, might become better during pregnancy, and then afterwards they've all dropped. So, and then we are experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. So women are literally living this like monthly cycle of hormones, where as they go up and down and the periods all fluctuate literally, we are on this roller coaster where we might not realise why we might be more reactive or less productive, or say we're taking medication, that medication works better some days than others, and we think the problem is with us, whereas men, apparently they work on a daily basis. They wake up and they have more hormones in the morning, they go to sleep and they're gone, and they wake up and it's very nice for them. For us, it's like, well, who are we going to get today? And I definitely noticed this in myself, and it was something I heard a lot as a child of like, oh, you just have really bad periods. And
was your cycle ever explained to you?
No.
Yeah, because I think that's important, isn't it? Because actually, I mean, that's a whole other podcast, but, you know, how we are as women at different times in the month and having an understanding of that, when you can be more proactive, when exercise is more, you know, whether a run is going to be better for you or yoga is going to be better for you, or when you're going to feel more motivated to work. I mean, I know that I have these surges where I'm much more motivated. And then there's the moment, you know, if I'm on my period, I do not want to parent. I just cannot manage it. I cannot cope with the rage. So if someone explains your cycle to you and what's actually happening in the month, that's going to surely, you know, be beneficial.
It's really important. It's a really important, and also especially when we think of menopause as well, because that is when a huge number of women are discovering that they are neurodivergent, because it equally has a huge impact then, because your hormones are going. And I think whether you want to call it hormones, menstruation, ADHD, autism, whatever it is, it's just being kind to yourself and accepting yourself on a day-to-day basis and knowing that you're not broken. Because I think that the problem is when you experience the feelings like you just said, if you don't know that that's normal and it's going to end, and give yourself grace and compassion, then you can get into this like shame spiral where you're like, I'm a terrible parent, how could I possibly think that? I'm the worst parent in the world, these people are all fine, like, oh my god. And then the feelings stay with you, and that happens again. So I coached someone once, or I had a conversation with them about coaching, and then they kept calling me up, but every 3 weeks they would call me up and they would be like suicidal basically, and I obviously was not the right person to call. But they kept calling me because I guess they didn't have anyone else to talk to, and I had told them, you know, they couldn't afford coaching, etc. And I was like, have you reached out to your doctor? And they had, but they were like, but I just need to talk to you about this thing. And then I was like, do you know that every 3 weeks you call me up with the same issue? Like, you called me literally 3 weeks ago, and I was like, what, has there anything changed lately about your hormones? And they were like, oh my god, actually, I've been taking a new pill for the last like 6 months. And I was like, okay, and has your doctor not pointed this out? Like, how on earth has your doctor not picked this up if you've been telling them about your thing? Like, and then they went to the doctor and changed the pill, and I think they got a lot better. So it's like, sometimes it can be really helpful to have someone else reflect that back to you. And I guess as a parent, to try and track that with your daughter would be really useful if you can. Like it was definitely not a conversation in my house growing up, and even the things around like periods and what kind of items you use, because I do think being neurodivergent is just horrifically disgusting. You're like, oh, I don't know what to do, or like it's like all the sensory things there, and it's very awkward and like really not talked about at all. But the more that you can normalize it and make women and girls
be prepared to know what to expect,
and be like, it's just part of who you are. And it's super interesting also from like a biological level. Like, I learned the other day that we were once in our grandmother's womb, because when you're in the womb, you've got the most eggs you're ever going to have. So it's like things like that, like where it doesn't have to be like a shameful bad thing, but just learning, and especially around it, kind of in a similar way to all of the neurodivergence. If you learn about your own body and when you're at your peak and when you need different things, like, you can then work with your brain and accept the cycles. Because I do think that something I see commonly, especially with ADHD and autism, is like people existing in crashes. And they get really annoyed with themselves because they're like, why can't I just be super productive all the time? But I will be super productive and then crash and burn out and then do it again. But it's just accepting the cycle and trying to, like, we call it learn to surf the waves rather than stop the waves from coming.
Is it useful to sort of journal that? Is it useful to journal your...
Yeah, I think as much like journaling, tracking, that's why coaching can be quite useful if you're going to do it over maybe like 3 months, because you can see these patterns that pop up. Or even, you know, I was coaching someone recently and they needed to basically make some time for themselves, which they weren't doing. And then when they did try to do that, they realised that like there were people in their life that would not allow that to happen. So sometimes you need to have someone from the outside like validate your experiences for you to be able to take that objective look at what is going on in your life. And I think also for kids to have someone that you can talk to about these things without worrying that you're going to upset your parents or make them feel bad or scared. And I think that would be something I say to parents as well, like, let your child know that they can't scare you. Like, there's nothing for them to feel guilty about, and that having feelings is a completely normal and okay thing, and normalize conversations about suicide and things like that, because if you can talk about it and normalize these things, it becomes a lot less scary for them to talk about, because really all it is a feeling of wanting your brain to switch off. But it's all the shame that comes with it, and the suffering and silence and thinking that you're broken, that is the problem. But if you can talk to your parents about it, and as a parent, if you can just trust your child, and the fact that they're talking to you is a really good sign.
And it's finding the places to talk, you know, whether it's you know, side by side, so you know, maybe in the car or on a walk, you know, that sort of official sitting down or being in a space that doesn't feel particularly comfortable. And also, I guess, for parents to journal is really helpful to keep sort of track of moods or things that have happened. Something else I wanted to talk to you about was school trauma and the repercussions of that, and also the difference that quite a few people have talked about, the transition from primary to secondary school, and how obviously the school might be much bigger, so there's lots of sensory things going on there because of the amount of people, the expectations, the social pressures, and the need for organisation, because suddenly it's not like primary school. They've got to learn more self-advocacy, and I think that's something I'm sort of aware of trying to help teach how to advocate for themselves. Sorry, there's a lot in that.
No, I completely get it. Yeah, so I've trained 500 coaches now on this executive functioning framework. So it's kind of what you're describing now. Because when I wrote this book before about ADHD, to understand it myself, I was really amazed to learn there's a 30% developmental delay or difference in executive functioning skills, which is basically our ability to do what we know. So these are things like motivation, impulsivity, organisation, self-awareness, like problem solving. And they're skills, so they can be strengthened. And when you can understand how your brain works and what you need to do and how to do it, things like pack your bag the night before school, like talk to other people, friendship, what to do at lunchtime. It can be really incredibly helpful. So it's really amazing to see. I've coached a lot of teachers and parents, and they've taken this framework into schools, particularly primary schools, to try and help them as children transition into secondary school, because I don't know why they don't teach them these basic life skills, but I feel like we should teach children these skills of like memory and like how to have a list in the morning of what to take and what to expect as you change school. And it is pretty brutal of our society to like raise them up to year 6 and then make them start all over again and then be like, now make new friends.
Take yourself to school, pack your own bag. Make sure you've done all your homework, you know. Yeah,
without warning them for that. And I've worked with quite a few children who have really, really struggled in a few ways. So the first one is that at primary school they felt like clever, like they knew who they were, they had the sense of identity. And then at secondary school they felt like bad and stupid, and because their brain is also trying to cope with all of the differences in environment and friends, etc., that takes up a lot of space in their brain, and then they've got to learn in a slightly different way maybe, and so then they feel like suddenly they've lost their identity and they don't know who they are anymore, and that's when all of these mental health impacts creep in and flood them. And they feel stupid, and then they've also suddenly got pressure about what to do with their life and what job are they going to do and how good are they at exams, and all of this sudden pressure that's really, really overwhelming. And then I think linked to that as well is this pressure around growing up, and like, you know, for me as a teenager, I literally could not imagine being 18. I was like, I couldn't see a future for me at all. And I've talked to a lot of kids who have similar ways of thinking, and I do think it's something connected with how we experience time. But when everyone around you is like, oh, I want to work in marketing or I want to do PR, and you're like, I can't see anything past the age of 18. I used to say I think I'll be dead, and everyone was like, that's a weird thing to say, like that's not normal. And I was like, I feel like I will die at 18, but still here at 32. But again, if you're a child, to know that your brain does think like that, and that's okay, you don't have to have your whole life planned out, is really helpful. And then I think there's something horrible that our society does to kids when they get into, like, you know, big school, which is the things that they love doing. Suddenly they are like, they have to be productive, or they don't have time for them, or they need to be, like, you know, linked to the future of making money. And I coached one girl, and it was really heartbreaking because she applied for a performing arts school and she didn't get in, and so she refused to do acting, singing ever again.
Oh,
yeah. And it was really, really sad, because I was like, but you don't only have to do it if you get into the school which accepts like 0.1% of people that apply. Like, that's not the only way to do it. And I think then add on to that social media, and we're living in a world where they're like, oh, if I'm not famous, then there's no point, or I need to have like followers to do this, otherwise there's no point. And so it's really, really difficult. And I think the best thing you can do for your children is prepare them for that change. Maybe seek out coaching for them or yourself, like, around that time, because I do think any big transitions are going to be really, really stressful for neurodivergent people. Like, again, I had the same when I went to university, and when I graduated from university, that was when I left university, that was when my life like crashed down, because I no longer had the structure that was all I had known forever, like, of being at school. So I think trying to prepare them, trying to make sure there's support available, and like really breaking it down step by step, and making sure, again, that those open lines of communication are there. And I think in the ways that work for them. So if I think back to my childhood, what would have actually really helped me, which probably sounds really weird and my parents would never have understandably thought to think of it, but like an email or something every week, of like a monthly check-in email, or like some kind of monthly check-in of like, just write how you're doing, like what's going on in your life, like doesn't matter what you write, like we'll just talk about it in any way, because I can communicate much better through writing than speaking. But things like that, like learning about what your child, how they like to interact, you know, and being prepared for them to maybe be less engaged with you, but trying to still open that line of communication with them where they at least have someone to talk to.
And perhaps there's that fear as parents of the vulnerability and worrying about their teenagers being safe, being able to be independent, and even dating when you are a little bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, and they're conversations to definitely have with your kids before, you know, I would actually say as young as like 10, like as even younger than you can think. And even especially now with pornography, I've talked to many parents whose children have watched pornography and they have beaten themselves up in spirals of shame. But of course they're on screens and they're being targeted by people like on screens no matter what. And I actually wrote a whole book about this called The Reality Manifesto, which is kind of about social media and helping parents to navigate that. But again, talking to them about that, like helping them understand. I think the most important skills for kids to learn now is critical thinking, like being able to question the information and what they see in front of them and be like, is this right or wrong for me? Like, you know, do I want to engage with this because it's all there on the internet? And the same, like, it's amazing to think when I was a child, we were always told not to talk to strangers on the internet and not to meet up with them. But then as an adult, literally that's the only way I meet anyone. Is like,
it's crazy.
Like you, like, you know, we only meet people on the internet.
That's like Halloween, where you go and knock on people's doors.
Yeah, it's literally
and
like that.
You take sweets off strangers.
Yeah, exactly. Neurotypical, like, exactly. But then we say don't take sweets off strangers normally, but only if we go and knock on their door and beg for them.
Yeah.
Like, but so these kids, they are literally growing up in a world where they're able to be contacted 24 hours a day in ways that are so insidious and so complicated that you're never going to be able to know 100% as a parent. So you have to just trust them and you have to open those lines of communication. You have to teach them things. Like, I was groomed as a 16-year-old by someone who saw, he was 11 years older than me, and he could see that I was extremely vulnerable, and he could see that I was really lonely and misunderstood, and he just basically pretended at first to be my friend and was like kind of presented himself like gay because he was a bit older and like really cool, and he seemed to get me, and he was like, oh yeah, we can go out and go clubbing and this thing. I was like, oh, he's my best friend, like, oh yay, I've got a friend. And I was really quite passionate about not rejecting people either, because I knew it felt like to be rejected. So if other people in my life were like, why are you hanging out with this person, I'd be like, no, they're my friend, like, don't be mean to them. Like, and again, it's that non-hierarchical brain where we might not see the difference in that, especially when we're younger. Like, it was only when I turned 26, 27 that I was like, oh my god, could I imagine dating a 16-year-old? Like, no, that's a weird thing to do. But as a 16-year-old, you don't realize that. So I think trying to open up conversations with people, because I didn't realize I was being groomed for a good year until he was like, oh, I love you. And I was like, sure, love you too, which I definitely did not often, but I can't believe that I got out of that situation. I was really, really fortunate. So trying to talk to your kids as soon as possible about this stuff and helping them to understand their bodies and that it's not a problem. It's not a bad thing. Like sex, all you're taught about in school is that you can get pregnant and die. Like, that's it. Like, especially girls are not taught anything about like the point of it, and they don't go into things like what they might see on the internet. And I think the more you can talk to kids about this stuff and openly, the better. But it's hard because as parents, they have a lot of shame around it as well. So
what are your opinions on screens as a coach?
I think that we are living in a really difficult time for everybody, regardless of whether someone is neurodivergent or not. I think screens can be really useful for people in a lot of different ways, obviously. Like, they've just changed the world. It's just the world that we're living in now. But I know for me, growing up as a model from the age of 13 and comparing myself to myself in Vogue was not good for my mental health. And then objectifying myself from a really young age and thinking like, oh, I need to present this version of me to the world was not great. And then I see that in the kids that I coach now, where they are growing up and they feel like they need to have a brand, or like, they need, and they spend so much time on the internet. When I was coaching one girl, it was half term and she was like not doing great. And I said, what have you done today? She was like, I've just sat on TikTok all day. And it's not uncommon for me to see. Often we might look at the screen time, but they really do not want to look at the screen. They're like, no, I don't want to look at it. No, I just never look. It's like 14 hours a day.
Yeah. And also the danger is what the algorithms pick up. Yeah. Because if you're talking about, the thing that you are most vulnerable about, it's then just going to feed it to you the whole time, which is so dangerous.
And that's why, I wrote that book about social media, because it's not about harmful content. Like, if you had an insecurity about your elbows, it could pick that up and then feed you loads of content about elbows, whatever. Like, and let's say you're self-harming your elbows, but it doesn't matter what we say. It's the medium, not the message, because it's designed to be as addictive as possible. Like, my friend's 2-year-old, he can make a phone call, but he can't talk. Like, he knows how to use a phone and how to get onto apps and a camera, and it's amazing. And then I think that the rest of our society hasn't caught up with this understanding that there are now different ways to communicate, and there are different languages that children are growing up with. Like, I had one girl I was coaching about her phone, because she genuinely believed as well that if you charge your phone up overnight, then it breaks it. And I was like, that's not true.
Right.
But yeah, so she slept with it in her bed, and had a very complicated routine about how to charge it. And then I said something like, well, what would you do if your phone broke? And she was like, that wouldn't happen. I was like, it could happen. She was like, no, it wouldn't happen. And for ages, she was just like, she could not imagine her life without her phone. And I was like, but surely, and we see it now with people when they said that in exams, kids are getting anxiety not being with their phone for an hour, even if it's in their pocket. And it makes sense because, and all of us are the same. Like, right now, I don't have my phone on me, and I'm like, here's my phone, okay. Has someone stolen my phone that's got my entire life on it? And again, then you see the difficulties for adults, because our life is really difficult. And so to occupy your child, if they're only going to be quiet when they're using a screen that helps them with like sensory regulation, then that's what helps them. But then at the same time, it's then all these feelings of guilt. And I think, again, the most important thing is not to blame yourself or your child, but to try and educate them about why these things are so addictive and what the purpose of them is, and how, like, if they are using things like Instagram, TikTok, they are the product. Like, say, I was just thinking, for me, I'd be like, oh, great, I can make money. And that's exactly what a lot of them do think, because TikTok has got, like, a creator program where, like, you know, you can earn money, but how much content you make. And I think a lot of kids want to be like influencers, but then it's trying to instill in them, like, okay, and what's the point? Like, what do you want to influence? Like, then what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to talk about? If you want to be like a speaker, what do you want to talk about? And trying to help them get to, like, substance and, like, things they actually care about, rather than just being popular on the internet, because it's really not a life. Because, like, the influencers that I've worked with, they, you know, then they have to sell their soul. Like, they have to promote oat milk or whatever it is that they need to do to survive. They don't get a choice. It's like modelling, but it is your personality, and it becomes a very complicated life to live where you don't really feel like you're a person anymore. You're a product. So trying to educate kids about that and help them feel empowered in making breaks between their phone and actually see it as, like, their choice rather than, like, something they have to do. But then you really feel for the parents, because I was talking to a parent recently who said that her son, in their school, they're all given iPads from Apple, and they're given, like, new ones every quarter or something. But then they have to do the exams with a pen. So, like, they don't write anymore in classes. They're using those iPads. And so she's had to get him, like, specialist tutoring for writing, because she was like, otherwise he's going to do the exam, which is, like, 3 hours long, and not know how to write a sentence. And it just blew my mind, because I was like, oh my God, like, you know, parents are, like, there is nothing else you can do. Like, because, you know, we can sit here and be like, screens are bad, screens are good, screens whatever, but they're just not... we have to accept that they're a part of your life now. So all you can do is prepare your kids and educate them.
And I think what I've heard you say throughout the conversation has been about modelling to our children, to our teenagers. One of the other things that cropped up a few times was managing emotions in friendships. And I mean, I know, you know, from my own experience being a girl and the challenges that, you know, has on us, let alone adding on another layer when you are coming at it with a completely different, you know, thought process. Again, do you think that is teaching our children about friendships much earlier on and within the school setting, about how you manage that kind of girl dynamic, I think, particularly?
It's a good question, one I'm still figuring out.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it was really nice in my autism assessment, because the assessor said to me something like, how do you experience friendships? And I was like, I'm glad you asked, because I was like, what is a friendship? Like, when I asked my therapist this, because I was like, I felt really complicated about my friendships in the last few years, when I became a bit more aware of, like, the dynamics and how I was showing up and just feeling drained. And my therapist was like, oh, we categorize them to, like, best friends, acquaintance. And I was like, no, like, what makes a friendship? Like, why are we friends with some people but not other people? And, like, why do we have romantic relationships with one person but not these people? And, like, she didn't like that answer. She didn't like these questions in exactly the same way as a parent. They're like, I don't know, you just have friends. But my autism assessment, we had a really good chat about it. And so it's kind of figuring out, I think, again, talking to children, but I would say something around trust. It's a lesson I'm not even kidding. I'm 32 years old and I'm just about learning how to date now. Where I'm like, oh, I do not need to give someone everything of me immediately after meeting them. Like, trust is earned, not automatically granted, which I do think when you're neurodivergent, you can feel like just lucky that someone is talking to you. You know, they pick you. I never thought that I had a choice of, like, who I was friends with or who I dated in particular, because I felt bad for everyone. I was like, oh, this person wants to date me, sure, I don't want to reject them, I know what it's like to be rejected. But helping kids to understand, and adults alike, to understand that you do not have to say yes to everyone, you do not have to feel bad for anyone. Their feelings are not your responsibility, your feelings are your responsibility. lessons. Like, if you hang out with someone and you are worried that they don't like you, it's their responsibility to tell you. Like, if they don't tell you, you can assume they like you. But these questions that we don't really think about, and we kind of, again, I think it would be useful for all children to learn this, of like relationships and friendships, and like, not learning what it looks like to be taken advantage of or bullied. Like, I was bullied throughout my life, and I literally didn't even realize that half the time. Like, I was just like, well, they don't like me. Like, oh, unless someone literally came up to me and told me they didn't like me to my face, I kind of like didn't really understand. And then when they did, I was like, I didn't understand why. Like, it was largely because of how I looked, and I was like, there's nothing that I can do about that. So I'm sorry that my appearance offends you. But kind of like, as a child, helping them to understand the point of connecting and friendships, and it's like people that understand you and accept you as you are, and that you like being around, and common interests. But I think helping children to create a sense of agency, and particularly girls, like agency and autonomy over who they allow in their life, what a boundary is, how to say no, that saying no is not a bad thing, like just really obvious things that for all kids I think is really useful. Helping them to understand, again, I think their body, like it's their body that belongs to them, and other people don't have access to that. Or I have seen in a lot of children them feeling like sexualized, and as they get older and like not knowing how to handle that or who to talk to about it, and they are living in the world where they are literally being sexualized all the time. So I think talking to them about that, like even to the point where if men are looking at them on the train or something, they know what to do. Like I coached one girl and about this exact issue. She said she thought a guy was filming her on the train, and I said, you could just say to him, excuse me, I don't know if you realise, but you're making me feel uncomfortable. And like these little ways of talking, like when you hold, it was when you do X, I feel Y. I would prefer it if you did Z. So saying like, excuse me, when you hold your phone like that, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. I prefer if you, didn't. But just things that we've not really ever learned, because she didn't want to feel like she was accusing him. But I was like, that way you're retaining responsibility. You're saying, when you do this, I feel this way. Can you not? But it took me 30 years to learn that. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Oh my God, it's so yeah, basics. Really simple things, and helping people to decide that for themselves, and maybe create their own like guide for themselves of what these things look like. And literally that is what I'm doing now with a 32-year-old adult. Like, okay, what is a good relationship? These are the red signs, these are the red flags. This means that people probably not my friend, like things like expecting me to pay all the time, or only getting in touch when they are expecting something from me, or like people that I don't feel good around, and not feeling like I have to see them just because they've asked me to hang out. It's complicated.
It's good, yes. What I've really taken from you from this conversation has been modelling behaviour, communicating what might seem obvious, communicate it in plenty of time as well, so that you're preparing your children sort of pre the event. I've heard you talk about us as parents, really taking care of us. There's so many things I feel like I've got more in my toolbox. Oh, good. More kind of, stuff that I can really take away from this conversation. So thank you for that, Leanne. And I just wanted to finish by asking you, what are your main hopes for the future of neurodivergent kids?
Ooh. At my book launch, at the end, this parent stood up and she said, my daughter won't go to school. And she was crying, and it was really emotional. And she was like, she won't take her at GCSEs. And what would you say to this girl that's like, struggling so much and being failed by everyone, and we've had to fight so hard for her to get a diagnosis, etc. And then I basically said, your child is growing up in a world that is very, very different to our world, like that we grew up in. They're growing up in a world with ChatGPT, where they can Google the answers to literally anything, where, the basic society that we're living in is under question. Like, they've lived through a lockdown, they've lived through all these different kinds of challenges, and they speak a completely different language to many of us. Like, they can make a TikTok video about something we cannot understand in 2 minutes. And I think it's just recognizing the strengths in them and helping them to flourish because of that. Like, I think the reason that, you and I are even having this conversation right now is because neurodivergence has been destigmatized a lot. And the conversation we've had, like, about girls and periods and all of these things that normally are just not talked about, especially around neurodivergence, is really, really important. So I hope that these conversations continue to happen, because I think that they're going to become under a lot of attack soon by people like in America, where they're trying to make a registry of autistic people. And I would argue that that is because neurodiversity is kind of inherently a threat to the status quo of how things are. And also it's really obvious that the way things are, the way that our society is not working for anybody. It's broken. The sheer way that we work and learn, the pandemic changed all of that overnight. So now, even if you're not neurodivergent, as a parent, you're like, well, I could travel 2 hours a day to an office and then come back and then not have time to do X, Y, and Z, or I could do my job from home, which I did for 5 years. So why should I just go back now? And the officers are like, no, because you have to. They're like, you don't have a choice. And you're like, but why? So I think the more that this kind of neurodivergent way of thinking is coming into all of our consciousness, we're like, but why do we have to do things that way? Like, actually, maybe we can treat children like human beings and give them choice over the things, etc. And so I really hope that conversations like this continue to happen, because I do think, especially when we see the government, how they're acting around like disability benefits, etc. in the UK, like, because they take away the shame that is involved with being a parent of a child that thinks differently, whether that child is like crying in public and having a meltdown, and another parent says to you, I get it, I'm also going through the same thing. And it makes them feel better. Like, every time that you speak up and share your experiences, you empower another parent to do the same. And then that makes these children feel seen and accepted and heard and validated, instead of hidden away and treated badly. So that's what I hope. And then I hope, like, when they can be seen and accepted as they are, like, all of those strengths and the amazing things that make them think differently can be utilised and helped. Because I know for me, the first 25 years of my life were pretty much hell. But then after I understood my own brain and how it worked differently, I've done the most amazing things. Like, now I've published 5 books and trained companies like Disney and Google and coaches, and talking even on a podcast like this. But I really wanted to end my life like 5 years just before I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I think it can really be the difference between like surviving and thriving. So I just hope that we will see a world where these kids thrive, and I think they will, because again, they're living in a world that is very different to what we think is right and normal, and they, I think, are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for.
Yeah, and I think that the girls, they need to be seen and talked about more.
Yeah, and they need to use their voice.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is amazing. And thank goodness we've got, a brilliant brain like yours advocating for all of us. Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit too. You can always get in touch with me on email, that's hello@letstalkndkids.com, or on Instagram @letstalkndkids. I'd really love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids.